Okay, we're live. Welcome to io.js TC meeting February the 18th. And we've got Bert, Chris, Colin, Dominic, Isaac, Michael, Trevor, and me, Rod Vag here. We are missing Ben, who has given his apologies, same with Fidor. So we are too short, but we're going to keep going. So on the agenda, just asked everyone to have the agenda document open, and I don't have it here. So I've got a bunch of things to cover today. Probably need to get stuck into it quickly. We'll do a mini stand-up first. So who would like to go first on stand-up?
I guess I'm at the left side. I didn't do much. There was Node Summit. We had a company all hands after that. So besides some usual Windows issue stuff, it's nothing in my hand.
Worked on style guide stuff. Ran into some problems with ESLint integration because it picks up way too many things. So trying to balance that out so it's not a gigantic pull request. Other than that, it's been kind of a slow week. Okay, that's it for me.
I think I'm next. So I was at Node Summit last week. I've been catching up on work. As far as io.js, I've been reviewing pull requests and issues. One of the, I guess, biggest things I've been working on is trying to port things from joint Node that have been going in over to io.js where appropriate. I guess Dominic's next.
Yeah, the relevant things I've been working on have been VM related. Started using it in Anger in JS DOM. Going to have an io.js release of JS DOM out soon, and found some fun stuff. So there's a whole issue around global proxy. There's a bug that it'd be nice to get more eyes on if people are interested in. I think there's a lot of discussion to be had there if you're interested in the subtle complexities of global environments and VMs. But yeah, generally finding things with VM and starting to do builds with them fixed.
Rod.
Oh, am I next on your list? Okay, sorry. I was wondering why no one's talking. Isaac's next on my list. Okay, I've been very busy with work. And what have I done io.js wise? Probably not as much as I normally do, but we've had some nightlies out. We've had a release proposal in for 1.3.0, which is due probably tomorrow, but you should have a look at that issue if you are interested in that. And I'm going to hand over to Isaac.
Hello, I was at Node Summit and preached the good news of NPM, and I have continued doing just NPM stuff lately. I've had very little time for io.js. So the next person is Michael. Sorry, I had just typed in the chat that like you call on the next person, and instead I didn't do it. Sorry. So Michael, you're next.
So spun up the Internationalisation Groups, so we have a lot of people now, over 160 I think now, doing internationalizations. Handle a lot of press inquiries because of the foundation stuff. The website had a bunch of new stuff land as well, including like internationalization support and a new build system. And worked on the roadmap and the stability policy, and ready to clinch that up in this meeting. So.
I've been attempting to land what I consider critical bug fixes into Node.js. I'm mainly because people are still using it, and I believe that it does at least need to stay critically updated. And been occupied with work-related things.
Cool.
And moving house too. Okay.
Oh yes. I'm still sitting on a couch with no legs on it. I need to put those legs on.
Okay. Quick review of last meeting. If there's anything that stands out you want to bring up, do so now. So we looked at the assert stuff with deep, strict, equal, and checking of the prototype property. We looked at a release PGP key strategy and policy, which there was really nothing to add on. And we had a quick discussion about some VM bugs, so it was a fairly quick meeting, and I think there was limited attendance on that one too, because of actually no, was it Nodes? No, it wasn't Nodes. It was before that. Okay, so let's get straight into it. On the agenda we have first of all, Chris, this is yours. So issue number 822, util. Fix the behavior of isObject. Now, I believe the reason it's on the agenda is because it's if we accept it, then we're going for simvert major.
Yep. I just wanted to see what the reception to that would be like if we want to try and bump major, or what's the timeline for when we want to do that.
Can you explain real quick why it's a major bump?
So it's not fresh in cache, but I do believe it actually fixes functions weren't being reported as objects, and now they are. So it actually expands the scope of what isObject will say yes to.
Okay, but we consider it a fix, right?
It could break things if people are using it. Suddenly their code is accepting more things than it was before.
So I mean, yeah, but we have to separate the idea of like things that can potentially break from things that actually are API changes, right? I mean, we improved the error messages, and that broke a bunch of people's tests. Like that, any change that we make, anything like that's visible, is potentially breaking. Is this actually a change in the expected behavior that we've documented in the API, or is it just a fix? Like
this
never could have been the way that it is.
If someone was using isObject to filter out functions before, which is potentially something that they might have done or used it for, this would change that, and suddenly their code would be broken. So it is a public behavior change. So I wouldn't consider it a fix. I mean, I would consider it a fix. Like, this is how I would expect the behavior to work overall. But it is existing behavior that could break people's code downstream. So I kind of wanted to see what the consensus was for when do we want to start working on the 2x branch? When are we looking at releasing a major? And just so I can give an update on timeline on it.
So one I want to talk to that a little bit. One thing that I don't want to do is, which works well in really small modules, right? Like you can just kind of plod along, land changes whenever you see them, and whenever you say yes, this looks like a good idea, and then bump the version based on whether it's a breaking or feature change. But for a platform like Node, we have a little bit of a bigger API surface, and so if we do that, if the only breaking change between 1.x and 2.x is this thing, let's say, we're not going to start landing, other patches and bug fixes on both places, and so it'll get really complicated, right? We probably want to put off the 2.x release until we have a little bit more substantial changes in there, so we can kind of batch up some of those breaking changes altogether. I don't think that that's something that should happen every 3 years, but I do think it's something that maybe we should limit to some reasonably modest time frame, like 6 months, let's say. I don't know. What did you all think?
I agree with you, Isaac. And it also depends on the kind of change. Like, I think this is also really minimal, and I imagine having to explain people that io.js 2 has this major new feature, which is like isObject now has slightly different semantics. And by the way, I'm not against this patch, but I mean, it's kind of arguably wrong. Like, I mean, I expect isObject to work like type-off, so sort of a good reason to land this patch would be everybody else does it.
So I want to just do a little bit of devil's advocate here. First, maybe we can get away with calling this a bug fix, and if so, that solves the whole issue. But kind of, at least at the beginning of the io.js project, I felt like the zeitgeist was just December. Like, if we release 2.0 in a month, then that's fine. And because version numbers don't mean the same thing, we don't have to announce 2.0 on Hacker News as like, oh my God, it's version 2. It's not Rails version 4 or whatever. It's just we made a breaking change, and then people are supposed to evaluate it just like they do every release and be like, okay, well I shouldn't upgrade automatically, but yeah, we could probably upgrade to that because we don't depend on isObject. I don't know. I know it's a bit harder, and so I realize that I don't fully believe in what I'm saying, but I wanted to put that position out there.
Like, even if that's the goal, even if that's where we want to be, we can't go there tomorrow, right? Like, it's really hard to message this stuff as is, and if we it and start to increment faster, right?
We've also got the thing hanging over us of saying that we are compatible with Node. Have we stopped saying that, or are we going to? Because as soon as we do a 2.0, we're effectively saying no, we're not anymore. Like, there's stuff in here that really is incompatible. We're not just fixing stuff. We're breaking with joint node compatibility.
Well, to be honest, like we're compatible with past Node. We're not as much as any increment of Node goes. I don't think that we can continue saying indefinitely that will be compatible with wherever Node 012 goes because we have no control over that. Yeah, actually, so the language does say npm compatible to what Chris is saying. So this gets to the roadmap soon. The stability stuff. One of the things. Release channels.
You're breaking up, Michael. Small bursts.
Okay, in the roadmap, we have this idea of release channels. So there's a release, which is literally everything that we do with the semver, and then canary, which is basically any experimental stuff that we have along with the next V8. So something like this, we would probably want to put whatever the next and know that, even like that, we may end up seeing, okay, well, we tested next V8 now for 2 months. It's released, it's stable now. It's actually not a breaking change from the prior V8, so we're not going to increment entirely, and we may not take some of the other changes because we're not going to increment that much. But this would give us like a nice channel to be able to get these features out, get people testing them. Also create some automation that looks at what is breaking in the NPM ecosystem between latest stable release and canary, right? So we have some idea of how deep these changes might go and what we need to get fixed inside of the ecosystem.
So I just, if we want to transition a little bit to roadmap, I feel like we should call canary just like 2.x.
Well, no, I don't want to do that. I don't. I think we may we don't know how to change it, and we
can't hear you at all.
Let Chris talk.
Okay. So, reading through the roadmap and stability policies, so we discussed this a lot at great length, and there's only a few points that I'm kind of in opposition to, but the general idea of having channels I'm pretty much all for. The specifics of what a channel is in relation to the main repository, I'm still it's a little bit nebulous, I feel like. But the idea is that we have the let's see if I got the right issues up. So we have the release channel that's sort of the what we've been doing already, and that's the only one that gets a version designation in Michael's proposal. Canary only gets it's like almost like a nightly, but it also brings in the next generation V8 and whatever's going to be landing in io.js for the next release. And then the next generation stuff does nightly builds of something called next generation, which is the idea that we'll have a sort of long-running branch to support ES6 features, or sorry, ES 2015 features better through the Node API. So we'll have like an alternate API that we're working on in parallel.
Yeah, we should talk about NG kind of separately because I think it'll actually end up getting built out not probably as a branch, but as like a collection of new standard lib modules, and we can talk about that later. But really, it's just there's canary and stable, and we only put version numbers on things that are stable. Also,
so
like,
actually, the original issue I mean, we're still talking about this util is object fix. It seems to me that we're still in this weird position of having to invest a lot of emotional energy into version numbers, and everyone here has said we want to move to December, but we're also recognizing that the community has still invested a lot in version numbers because of the way that joint node has been in the past, and the way that we've messaged that in the past as well. We're all responsible for that. So at what point are we able to move beyond this concern, or are we never going to be able to move beyond it? Because if we're going to be held up by a concern about moving to a major bump, then is that going to actually cripple us for the next 2 years?
Well, okay, so hold on. Take version numbers out of it for a second, okay? So just stop even considering version numbers. Like we have a change that is potentially breaking, and we don't know how much it does break, right? So we need a place to put it where people can actually test with it, and where we can possibly put some automation around figuring out how much it might break. And we're going to have future changes that are somewhat similar, right? Take version numbers entirely out of it, and just think about it that way, right? So like we need a branch, probably called Canary, right, where we can just land this stuff. And then once we're confident that it doesn't break too much, or we're confident that it does break a lot, but it's worth it, so we're going to bump the major, that's when we actually put it into release and do a release about it.
So just to add to that a bit, for immediate action on this specific pull request, I'd be fine with adding it to a milestone and saying that we're tracking it in a milestone for now. I agree that we need something like Canary. The difference between Michael's proposal and my proposal is that in Michael's proposal, it would be landed to a Canary branch, which would eventually get merged into the release branch. And in my way back when proposal, it would be merged into the master branch, and we would cut releases off of that, and we would use the delay in time between it hitting master and it hitting stable as the canary. One thing I noticed when I was doing the release, I think it was the 110 release, is that there's still a lot of manual like code modification that has to happen for us to update a version at all. And I was wondering what the feasibility of like making that more automated, making that like saying through the Jenkins build system, like this is the version it's at, here's how you patch it, using sort of like version template stuff, so that we can move to something like a master or a canary branch and not have to like always pull request into these v1x, v2x branches. That might be a topic for a different time or a different issue, but
Yeah, I guess. Rod, I want to answer your question about our emotional investment in version numbers. It's of course not the version numbers itself that concern me, but what we have to ask ourselves is, is it more painful to make like small breaking changes often, and then that people update their code more or less continuously, or is it more painful to release a batch of breaking changes every now and then? And I think for the typical node, and especially the bigger node apps, like the latter is easier. It's easier to, in July have people find all the places where they use isObject and maybe a couple of other things and change that and then switch over to a new version. Whereas it just be too painful if every month we released a new major version and every time people not only had to test, but they would know I have to change something here and there because there was a fundamental breaking change in the API. And so this is mostly why I would say that we have to pile up breaking changes a little bit before we release them, just because it's easier to our users.
Well, and also I don't disagree with that, and I think that Semver should mean something slightly different to libraries versus applications like we've got here. But exactly what that means, I think, is very hard to pin down because without some sort of rule that says, okay, let's have a time delay of X months before we actually release this thing, I can just see we're going to be batching this stuff up forever, just being afraid that, oh, this pile doesn't look substantive enough to release a major yet, and we need something bigger in here.
Like, this is all really just guesswork, though. Like, that's my problem with all this, right? And the problem with committing to version numbers when we land code is that this is all guesswork. Like, if you put this into a canary build and it was out there for a little while, and I could show you definitively that every test in NPM passes or fails the same in the last release and with this change, we would just put it in a patch release, right? Like, we wouldn't even care. But we think that it might break stuff, and we don't know how much it breaks, and so we need to put it somewhere where we can test that and have people download it. And if we have a bigger change that we want to make that we think might break even more stuff, and it turns out to break more than half of NPM, we'd probably just back it out. So before we even get into down the road a month or so from now, or whenever we're thinking about doing a 2.0, we just need a place to put this stuff and get it out into releases and write better automation and gain some confidence in what we are and aren't doing.
Okay, so resolution for this, can we, I think we've had a proposal already to tag this as a milestone and then push it down the track until we have more substantive things to, until we have either a release policy for canaries, etc., or we have a more substantive list of things that go into a breaking change.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. Let's move on while I document that. Oh, the next one is mine. So that's issue number 819, which is translating the installers for OS X and Windows. So the reason that's come up here is simply the question of whether we want to have internationalized stuff within the core repo that might be difficult to maintain and to keep in sync. So I believe translating installers, I don't know the technical details, I haven't looked at it. I believe it's a matter, it's a fairly simple matter of just translating a little bit of text for each of them and having that with the build process so that when you run the installer it picks up your local machine language and goes with that. But do we want to have the maintenance nightmare of change a bit of English in the repo and then have to get everyone with all the languages to make sure theirs are in sync? That's an open question.
I think it's reasonable. I mean, we have ways that we do that everywhere else anyway. I mean, in the website, every time that we make some kind of text change, all of the translators are watching that repo and then they pull it down and they modify it.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems it's a bit unproven, but right now there's one translation that I saw for the Windows installer, and it translates it to German. Of course, there's no particular issue I have with this patch, but I imagine that if things go as smoothly as with the website, we'll have 60 languages over the course of a weekend. And now whenever something small comes up, I have to add a little note to the installer and whatever. Now I'm waiting for 60 translation teams.
No, you're not. You're definitely not waiting. You just do it, and then there are a bunch of other PRs from the translation teams later that bring it up to sync.
All right, and so it no longer works with the other language. I mean, it might not even compile if you add some text and there is no translation.
Won't it just use the old text?
It depends. I think for Windows installers, actually, I'm not sure about that.
So I'm actually running into this identical issue with Learn New Node right now. So I added a new check to one of the exercises in Learn New Node that just does this one thing. It does a little tiny check, and it prints out a little progress icon to say you passed or failed this. That's it. and so it's a key to look up in the internationalized database of all the strings. But I can't publish that now until I get all of the languages. I can't publish until I get all the keys into the database. Otherwise, it just prints out as a key. The release is blocking until I get everyone's stuff in. So that's the kind of situation I think Bert is suggesting here. We're going to be in a blocking situation until we get all the 60, and then somebody's got to make sure that we have them all. And even if it's just like a word change in an existing string, do we care if they're out of sync and just let somebody pick it up down the track if it is out of sync, or do we have some way of tracking that?
Yeah. So first of all, you shouldn't, if there isn't a key for the language that you're looking at, just default it to English. So you can have a mix of another language and English. And like everybody who runs computers in other languages is used to seeing like certain error messages and random stuff pop up in English. And if we release with one of those, it's fine. Like all the translators, the first time that they install that, they're going to go, oh, I need to go and update that. Like eventually they all fall back in line. We don't need to hold up the entire release in order to do that. And this is actually this is how like Mozilla and Ubuntu and all of their like translation teams work as well. Is that they're putting out like quick nightlies and stuff, and then they're picking that up. And some of the translators fall a couple releases behind, and then they catch up later.
Well, so I'm Dutch, and so sometimes I use software in Dutch, and I actually find it typically wildly annoying. When this is all mixed up, and the other issue is that the quality of translations is typically super low, so sometimes stuff doesn't even make sense unless I can in my head do the translation back to English and then back to Dutch. Suddenly stuff falls together. So my suggestion would be, well, first of all, before I start accepting translations, I don't want to have a single native speaker. Like, I want stuff, to be written by one native speaker, in this times a German, and then reviewed by another. I cannot review translations. I think we should pick our battles a little bit, which means start translating, supporting languages for countries where English proficiency is typically low. I mean, I can understand that having a Chinese translation or a Russian translation or a Japanese translation makes much more sense than having a Dutch translation. There are no programmers here that don't speak English. It's just in a way comparable to having a nicer logo, like having stuff localized in your own language. And then third point, this is the installer. The installer is a bit painful. Logic, like you described, Michael, fall back to the default. That's out of my control. It's the installer framework that decides this, and plus it's the installer. People see it once, but finding a next button usually is not so hard. Even if in the hypothetical situation that you would not speak English at all, people would be able to install stuff. And I think if we translate things, there are more important areas. You might even consider the docs or the blog or a blog, whatever. And so this is why right now I'm definitely against landing a thing like this.
Okay, so first of all, like the docs, the blog, the website, these have already been translated by a bunch of these languages. So it's not a matter of prioritization. Like if people are already done with all that stuff, they'll get to this because it's like the only thing that they haven't translated yet. Also, your point about Dutch, like already come up on the website, and essentially what we're doing is we're allowing each language community to decide what they want the default behavior to be. So even though there is a Dutch translation of the website, the Dutch language community probably won't have us defaulting people's browsers to it the way that we do.
In case you're saying something, Michael, I can't hear you.
Decisions like if you or that language, we defer that judgment to the language community. So for the website, if you show up with a Chinese browser, we're going to default you to Chinese. But if you show up with Dutch as your language in your browser, the Dutch community actually wants you to have English because everybody speaks, like you just said, everybody speaks English, and a lot of notices and warnings and stuff are going to be in English. Even though there is a Dutch translation of the website, they want it to be optional and not defaulted.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, I don't see any reason to not enable this and allow people to pick it up and go after it. And I think that, but we shouldn't block any patches or changes that go in from this point forward on waiting on localizers.
I'm curious what other people think.
Well, I think one of the big problems here is that most of us are just English speakers. So it's difficult for us to make a call on this. And I have the same problem with learning Node. I don't speak another language. I can't read any of these translations, so it's difficult for me to muster an opinion on the quality of any of these things and even whether things should go in. So we need broader feedback on whether it... I don't even know, does it even matter if an installer is in English? Like, are people just used to that, and is that just the way that software generally is these days, and it's accepted?
Yeah, my same thinking. I mean, like nobody would consider translating function to German, or JavaScript keywords. That would be, I think, clearly crossing a line for many people. But there's this, I would say, there's this gray area where it basically doesn't really matter. And language consistency is also nice. Like mixing up two languages, I find always a bit strange and confusing sometimes.
So I feel like maybe we should just try and enable the community to do whatever they can do, and as long as it doesn't add friction. And I think Michael's been saying that it doesn't add friction, that you do a release and the localized release doesn't get released until they finish translating. And I think it sounds like he has tools in place for that. But that would be my instinct. Is if this is something people want, let them do it. We should totally not get in the way. And we should just make sure that we can keep doing our thing.
So that was one suggestion. Going to be we should just probably go forward with this unless there are technical reasons that would mean that translations would block releases. So unless there's something that would technically in the installers, because installers are that's pretty nasty code for both OS X and Windows. It's the way we have to do it. So unless there's any technical thing in there that would mean that translations have a blocking effect, then how about we enable it and see what happens?
Yeah, I think we won't know if they can block until we enable it, right?
So is there in this particular case, I think we are talking about this translation issue for German. Is there like a community around? I mean, I've seen the patch by one person. Is there a community that will back this up, or
Yeah, there's like more than 10 people, I think, in the German one. Or maybe it's a little bit less than 10, but I mean
maybe we should. But I think that there's an interesting point here, which is that we don't want like if a community happens to lose its most active member and drop off, and we're not getting translations for language X anymore, we should never link to like old versions and say like, oh, I'm sorry, you're using language X. The latest version of io.js for you is the old version. We should just be sure that you either get English or you get the localized one, but not an old version.
So my suggestion would be, I think if there's no technical issue, that's what Michael said. Like if there's no technical issue, I'm okay with landing this patch. But the full responsibility for maintaining this stuff will be with that language community. I cannot do it. And that includes and so like sort of from a TC perspective, I expect a certain quality. It's not just gonna be one person who has a little bit too much time on the person's hands this particular week and does some stuff and then moves on to a different life. That's not acceptable for the quality that io.js wants to have. If there's a slightly long-term plan, the translations can be QA'd by people that speak the particular language, then I'm cool with it. I think.
So everything you're worried about is resolved. Like the reality is that the groups, the localization groups that only have like 1 or 2 members haven't really done much and aren't getting much done. And the ones that have 10 to 30 members are getting like a ton done. And every localization that we've taken so far on the website has been +1 and reviewed by other people from that language community.
All right. So, well, I mean, I guess I then expect the same for the translation patches, or like the translation part of the translation patches. Like the community is responsible for that, the localization community for the particular language.
Yeah. So the website so the website has a contribution policy for like how many +1s and working group members need to be involved in something. We've just extended it to what we do for translations, and basically like it needs to be reviewed by somebody else from that language community before it gets contributed. And we have a group of people that like called translators that have write access, and so they're merging those patches now. But basically like each of those language communities we're allowing to come up with their own process for reviewing stuff, because a lot of them actually build it in the repo for their language and do a ton of reviewing and back and forth in a branch there before they even push it over. So we want to allow them to land it right away. But some of them actually they take a contribution right in as a PR and then they review it in line on the website. And we've allowed like each of the language communities to organize that however they feel comfortable.
I mean, so that sounds good. The thing we want to be responsible for, though, is that if there's a person or there's two persons and they claim we are the language community, we need to be somewhat considerate of the actual performance they will do. I mean, indeed, if people can work out a review policy with each other and it leads to good results, I'm fine with it. But we should have some oversight on the project, I would say.
But this issue, what you're saying, is very similar to the technical things that we come up against. Like, consider TLS and crypto stuff in there. A lot of us just aren't qualified to review any of that code, and we just have to say, okay, the people that are passionate about this stuff and that are working on it are the authorities. I can't make a judgment on that. So, whatever they come up with, they'll have their arguments in the issue. Well, we'll just go with that. I'm not qualified to review it. And it's the same for languages. We're not qualified to review it, so you have your little arguments in the issues that come up, and if you have reached a resolution, merge that and we'll go with it.
Yeah,
I think that's the same process.
That's okay, but that means that our oversight, if you want to call it that way, is purely procedural. So the things we should be looking at is, is there actually a review process? Like, is there more than one person involved? How high is the buzz factor? Those are things that I think that is exactly what the DC should be concerned about.
I think this is similar to all the other working groups. I mean, like working groups, we've made them autonomous, and they've created their own policies around this, right? And the web group is much more but we're confident that it's quality enough for the website, and that they're the people that can make that judgment. And what we've seen from the translation community so far is that they're doing the exact same thing. Some of them are rigorous, some are a little bit less rigorous, but they still come out with good work. I mean, there's no way for us to have visibility into this at the granularity that you want, because we don't know the language, right?
Well, I mean, we can look at the output. I guess that's what we're saying. Okay, so can we sort of drive this to a resolution?
I think the resolution is to enable it unless there's technical blockers, and then see what happens.
And if there are technical blockers, we'll probably back it out until we can figure them out, right?
Yeah. So just one procedural thing. If say if I was to go in and do a pull request against the language of the installer to say, just some minor tweak, and then that gets landed, do we just is that the end of it, and then we let the other languages catch up on that, or do we need to ping a language group that pings everybody who's they get an email to say please update this, or do we just let that happen organically? Is there a procedure that we can put in place there, or Michael?
So for the website, we have it. We usually tag them like needs translation, and a few people watch. But you can just which languages have been translated that you need to ping, and we're already in a GitHub team, so you can really easily just ping those teams just like at. So if we want to do that, or if we want to find out something that would help, but we haven't built that yet for the website, and it worked itself out. People are just watching it.
Okay, let's move on. I'll write this up while we do the next one, which is now this is Ben's one that he was keen to punt till the next meeting, which was the process.send sync IO regression, issue number 774. Does anyone have any? Is anyone else involved in that enough to talk to it, or should we just punt that till next meeting?
I know what it's about, but I think we should punt it anyway.
Okay. Is it a concern that it's an ongoing regression that hasn't been fixed yet?
It is an ongoing regression. I mean, it's relatively minor, I would say.
Okay. We just noted in the known issues section then.
Yes.
Okay, let's move on. The next one was I put on the agenda, which is the unhandled rejection tracking for promises. The reason I put it on the agenda is just simply because I don't think there's enough of the TC in particular, but also collaborators that have a strong opinion about this, and it would be good to help them get it landed unless there's strong objections. So the idea is that we have a hook-in process for emitting events when there are potentially unhandled rejections on promises, and I think the current situation is suggesting that you should wait for one full tick of the event loop before doing that because of the way promises work. Dominic, do you want to talk about this and see and suggest the way forward?
Yeah, I mean, last I looked, the PR was pretty good. You know, it's really just a matter of whether you guys think that the code quality is good and isn't too far-reaching or anything. To introduce the problem, you know, since promises are temporal, you know, they have instead of like synchronous errors, which is just an ever-growing list, they have a growing and shrinking list because the errors can be handled later. So the way to handle this is to emit an event when something gets added to the list, and emit another event when it gets removed from the list. And that way you can, you know, do whatever you need to do, log to your server, you know, whichever. You know, usually you'd use this for like telemetry type stuff, but also for development time debugging. And so, yeah, I mean, the PR right now just adds the events. It doesn't add any default handlers for them, which I think is a good incremental approach.
Dominic, could you clear something up for me?
Yeah.
Okay, in both IRC and here I posted a comment I made. So I wrote a native module that simply hooks into that and had it print out. Now I'm just throwing in the promise function, right?
Yep.
Now I thought v8 internals ran that in the microtask queue, but it's synchronously run, and it synchronously reports that it knows it was rejected, so it first reports that a handler was added after rejection, and then it reports that it was rejected without a handler, even though I did add a handler immediately after the promise. Like that doesn't make sense.
So there's two promises in your example. There's the return value of p.then. Oh wait, but that one's not rejected. Yeah, I'm not sure why the ordering is backwards from what you would expect. But I do know that in general, the V8 hooks are very low-level synchronous. But
I thought the callback was supposed to be pushed onto the internal microtask queue, which was run after the completion of synchronous JavaScript execution, which means that it should have detected that I placed a reject handler before it would have run the callback.
So I don't actually know where it puts the callback. I wasn't aware that it put it on the microtask queue, but maybe it does. But even if it did, it doesn't have the logic to go back and remove it after it becomes aware that, oh wait, you placed a handler.
Well, what I'm saying is it doesn't know I placed a handler until after I run the callback. But the callback shouldn't have run until after the .then had run and the
Sure, but the callback's already pushed to the queue. It's not going to go back and remove it after you run the .then.
But that has nothing to do with the fact that I've placed handlers after that. So it placed a callback to the queue to be run in the future. Immediately in my synchronous JavaScript, I placed the handlers. V8 is telling me I didn't place handlers when it reports to me that it was rejected.
I see. I'd have to look at the implementation of set promise reject callback, but my guess is that it just looks at the current state of the world at the time. It just does literally the simplest thing that could work. You know, the Chrome debugger does a lot more complicated stuff on top of it.
But that means it have to execute the callback before it hits the synchronously, not on the microtask queue.
That might be what it does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like Now, I've looked at the code several times. It's looking pretty good for me. It was implemented in a way that if you're not using promises, or even if you are and nothing is rejected, you have almost no overhead. So I'm okay with it. But what V8 is doing internally, I fear will confuse people when they start using this.
What do you mean what V8 is doing internally? We're kind of abstract.
This promise rejection ordering doesn't make sense.
Well, only if you use the low-level V8 thing. But if we use the high-level thing that in the pull request, then it's much more reasonable.
Okay, that's
so. How about this though? The interesting thing about this discussion is that if there really are concerns with the way that V8 is implementing this, then simply by exposing this feature, we give the community the ability to give that feedback to V8. Because if we're going to hold off until V8 gets it,
is asking that, and that's what Benjamin is saying at the bottom of the ticket, is that they had to set up some kind of like a queue,
yeah.
That's why they had that weak map or whatever going on. It was because they had to actually compensate for this issue, and that doesn't make sense to me that we're having to work around V8 internals.
So V8's doing the most low-level thing that could possibly work. Like, let's say you wanted to actually, for some reason, log every time a promise was rejected, and then every time a handler was added. Maybe because you're doing analytics on your code. I don't know. That's the level they're operating at. What we're operating at is trying to find unhandled rejections, which is kind of a different level. And you can use the lower level primitives to do that.
Oh yeah, and I totally understand that. It's like whenever promises have been explained to me, I swear it always says like everything happens kind of in the future.
Right. So that's true for user code, but I don't know for V8 debugging hooks. My guess is that they're synchronous.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the confusing part. Now I'm finding out that V8 is actually running callback synchronously, just not reporting anything until the future. When in fact I thought it ran the callback in the future, then reported immediately after it ran the callback.
Yeah. I see. Yeah, that's pretty confusing, but yeah.
That's like I'm happy with the implementation and the fact they were able to keep any performance hit out of any other code, so I'm fine with it. But yeah, that aspect of how V8 is handling it just seems weird to me.
Yeah, I think that we could try and take that as feedback to the V8 team and say, hey, this low-level hook is confusing.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think that the user-exposed semantics of this pull request are pretty solid.
Okay, cool. And then, yeah, in the future, if that gets fixed, hopefully we can remove a lot of that queuing or whatever is going on.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool.
So my only concern with this is that if it goes in and it gets documented, it's now part of the public API. And if one of these little things changes in the future and potentially causes a backwards compatibility break, we now have to eat a major bump.
No, it's like the PR is actually masking what V8 is doing. And so if V8 internals change, this API will mask that.
Okay. All right.
So basically what I'm saying is the V8 API should be doing more of what this API is exposing to the user. So if V8 changes it, it'll actually just simplify this code.
Okay, great. Then never mind.
Okay, so unless there's any objections, I think the resolution here is to give feedback to that PR that it's that it can be landed unless there are technical reasons not to, code-wise. So, but I would encourage everyone here and who's listening, who has an interest, to go and review that code, just to make sure that it has eyes on it, because it's a non-trivial change. So, any objections to that? Nope. Okay.
No.
Okay. Where are we? Logo, branding, and stability policy are the next two things on the list. So I think these are both Michael's. So you take over.
Yeah, so real quick, right after the first release, we all decided that we weren't actually going to be able to do that logo per release thing because we can't change all of the assets. We also now want to do a better design for the website, and we kind of need to pick a logo and a direction to go in. Somebody posted a lot of nice variations that we can use in all these scenarios that we need logos for, like all the different social media assets and all that kind of stuff. But we do have to get the TC to to rubber stamp using this logo and this treatment for the project going forward.
Wait, sorry. There's an actual logo somewhere? Oh, there it is.
I just posted the whole brand treatment. Just logo. It's you know, a color and a bunch of other stuff, but it's basically like this little hexagon rocket ship that has IO in it. And it's really nice. And there's flat versions and different versions that work back in Windows and all these different. It's something that's going to look good in each place that we need to put it, which is nice.
Yeah, I didn't know this was the Blast logo now, but I agree it looks nice. But I feel more like, you know, that if the working group decided this, then I'm cool with it. If it's just you, Michael, we can discuss it. That's a bit.
Well, I mean, the website group wants to go with this design, and this designer is actually willing to work with the website group to do a full design. But it's not the official logo until this group says that it's the official logo. So I don't want to. We didn't decide on an official logo until it gets stamped here. But it is what the website working group would like to have.
I don't really like it, but I also know not to intervene too heavily on designers' decisions, so I'm more than happy to suggest that the website group should take some responsibility here.
My only concern is font licensing. Just making sure that the what is it? Montserrat font is free licensed for people to use as well.
Okay, I'll look into that. You know what? Just designer find one that is freely licensed, basically. So I can put that in the requirements for the design and the brand treatment going forward.
Cool.
It's interesting to see that. I actually do like the logo, but I've seen there's 3 people on the TC that said they don't. So, like, how broad was the consensus on, like?
I'm surprised that we found a logo that more than one person can agree on, to be honest. That's pretty high for the amount of logos that we've gone through and the amount of difference in design aesthetics with this group of people.
I don't think you're going to find strong opinions here. I think all of us have learnt that we're not designers, so steer clear of that and let the designers do their good work. So that's my suggestion, unless anyone else objects, is to give the website working groups the TC's blessing to make that choice.
Yeah, totally. I'm all for that. Don't worry. An interesting question here, like, a bit maybe on a meta level, is how do we reach consensus on discussion? I think, if we would just let a very large people of people like rank available logos.
That's not gonna.
Then you would. Why is that not gonna happen, Michael?
Because I think that we'd end up the logo that's the hexagon plate with the sausage and the salami on it. I mean, we have a very eclectic community.
Well, I mean, but do you really believe that's what everybody's gonna pick? Then then I find it pretty arrogant to say no, we know better. I think that if you let a large enough group of people pick logos, you will probably end up with something like actually maybe a little bit too boring.
No. So this is how I feel about it, right? Like we have to think about the number of people that actually understand the restrictions that we have on the logo. Like I don't think that many people appreciate that. Like for just the social media assets, we have maybe 20 different like sizes that we need, like a logo or some kind of brand treatment to land in, all of which land in totally different looking sites. And so that group of people that have been dealing with that issue, like this logo, like how many variations that it has that we can use, who designed it is actually willing to continue to put in the work of building out these assets and working with the design group. There was actually another great brand treatment, but like those people aren't quite as engaged, and that asset doesn't work in all of those scenarios. I don't think that the wider community shares all of the concerns with how many places this asset has to land, right? Like nobody else is managing all of media channels and also like going through all the website translations and all that kind of stuff.
One thing that we might be able to do is tell the design group to maybe select a couple of logos that work, and then we could present that as a poll, so we would avoid the salami and egg logo, perhaps, that way. And it seems like from the feedback, there's people have like favorites of their own, like the Jupiter logo comes up a lot and fulfills some of the requirements there. Like it's 4 colors, so it works really well where we have 4 colors available, but it doesn't have like alternatives. Maybe people could step up to like boost up some of the ones that we say we're interested in, so that we don't have to like say so that we can say like, hey, design group, pick the ones that you think have the most potential, and then we can like get them to the right place. If that makes sense.
So we do all know what design by committee is. Has anybody else been through a design by committee? I actually went through an entire open source design and ended up horrendous. Ended up with a. I'm not joking. It's not a joke.
Yeah, I didn't hear your joke also.
I like really like don't actually have a lot of people that are. We a huge number of resources to actually execute this. One of the reasons the web group is because this design, a lot of people, this treatment, like, is willing to work and put in the work and has been really active in the community.
If you look at the wireframe version of the logo, like if you scroll down to the JS spelled out in binary thing, and just above that, where there's the responsive icons, kind of looks to me like a cyclops with a big tooth.
Yeah, I'm definitely getting that from the wireframe version. I'm getting Pokeball from the full color version, but I'm getting Cyclops with a big tooth from the wireframe.
It's like a,
Now we're going to get all racist on Cyclopses.
It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, I mean, do we want to project Cyclops with a big tooth?
it's like a Cyclops bird is what I think if I see it.
If someone shows up at NodeConf dressed like a big Cyclops with a tooth, it's going to be hilarious.
That's
now we have a
awesome.
mascot, you guys. We have a mascot.
To kind of draw this to maybe an actionable thing, would it be possible to say like we should set our standards for whatever logo we pick needs to fulfill, and then put that out there as an issue, and then draw from logos that fulfill that?
So right now we're delaying the amount of time that we actually. Okay, so now we're going to talk about having a monthly stuff, people vote, and then we make it through this whole thing. Whereas like the website group really wants a new website design now, and we have somebody signed up to do it, and we have a brand treatment available, right? Like
So
this is the
everyone,
thing that's available.
everyone in the website group happy with this? Like your whole group wants to go ahead with this, the logo and the brand.
So on Monday, like this item came up in the working group agenda, and this is what we voted to do. Maybe
Okay.
nobody heard. All I said was that the working group did approve it on Monday, and yeah.
So, Chris, what sort of standards would you be looking for stating what the standards are? I don't even know what that would entail.
So I'd say something like treatment in terms of number of colors available, saying like, okay, this is what the logo looks like under grayscale, this is what the logo should look like under 4-color and full color, different sizes it should meet and how it changes to adapt to those sizes. So like this is what it would look like as an icon at 16 by 16, 32 by 32, and then all the way up. What kind of treatment we want for like printed materials. Basically, like what's the Behance link covers a lot of these things. How does it work together with typography, and what set of colors have we kind of chosen to work well with the logo? I mean the designers. I'm not saying that we should personally get involved.
I have this feeling that This really is a working group issue. This group is not qualified to make those decisions, and so people who feel passionate about those kind of things, like you, perhaps Chris, maybe need to get involved in the discussion over at the website committee, and the TC maybe should just step out of the way, let it happen. If it fails dramatically, then great, we'll fix it. And logos evolve, so maybe that has to happen over time.
To respond to Chris's point, like stating our standards and coming up with all these requirements, this doesn't work in terms of building community and getting people signed up to do work. Because what we're saying is, hey, we have a bunch of ideas about how this thing needs to go and all these restrictions. Now you guys go and do a bunch of work. The reason why we have this good treatment is because we basically didn't say anything and somebody came up with something great, and then we realized down the line, God, we have all these restrictions that we need on a logo, and now that person would really like to help us continue to fulfill this, right? I intensely dislike this thread that we're on right now, where we're trying to tell other people what they should be doing in terms of like their own volunteer time into the project, when there are already people signed up that have done this kind of work that are pushing in this other particular direction.
I don't think we are. I think you're misreading it, Michael. I think this is more about trying to figure out what the TC's role is here, because we have opinions, and we as in our own roles, in our own work, and everywhere else, know to suppress certain opinions on things that we're not qualified for. So we're just having a discussion now about how the TC should be involved in this. I don't think we're asserting anything particularly strong here.
Okay.
Yes, what Rod said. I think what Chris was suggesting is basically there's a bunch of requirements. It has to be on a grayscale pixel 16 by 16, and it needs to look good as a banner on the website as well, and like everything in between. And I think what Chris is suggesting, hey, why don't we publish the list of requirements? I would say that's also a job of the website working group.
No. What you're saying is that the website working group chose to go in this direction with this logo with somebody signed up to do the work, and then you're saying, no, go have a contest.
Well,
like now we actually are stepping on the other group.
I think if there was broad consensus, and there's no, let's say there's not too much availability bias, like, oh, there's only one logo that has done this so far, so we will have to go with this one. Like that is a line of argumentation that I would not buy. Other than that, I am more than happy with having the website group decide all of this stuff. I'm just trying to see, like, how did it work? How did the selection process work?
So I mean, clearly we've seen all of the logos that have come in, right? And we've actually used a bunch of the logos in different contexts, and not having a consistent logo in all of these different contexts is sort of the frustration that led us to picking this one. And there was another brand treatment that was as exhaustive, that was really nice, that we did consider, but it just doesn't work in as.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like there actually was decent process and consideration, in which case I actually go with whatever logo you picked.
Yeah, so I think the concern being expressed here is not about trying to get people to do things with their their volunteer time that they otherwise wouldn't do, but simply the fact that that logo issue on the repo was one of the most exhaustive issues of community involvement. Like amazingly so, and the concern, I guess, is about making sure that that kind of concern from the community is taken into account. There's a lot of people in there that I imagine aren't aware of the stuff that the website group is doing, and maybe would have an opinion or some feedback, or maybe would even jump in with an exhaustive treatment like this as well, but they're not aware of it. So I think it's just a matter of making sure that there is broader involvement amongst the people that care.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is though, is that we're at the point now we like, and what they really responded was us saying that we would just take a new look for every release, and that sounded like a really good idea, but the restrictions of actually doing that got in the way, right? So we can't. Similarly, we're having a similar issue with all of with the rest of this. We're taking and pushing it this or that direction and working inside of all these different restrictions. We're managing all these different social media channels. We're having people like pick up versions of the logo and add little things from their language and stuff to them. Like, we have all these considerations that are baked into the people that have been putting in the work of maintaining all of this. So, and those are really the only people that have a shared understanding of the restrictions that we're operating under when selecting this. The broader community, like that hasn't actually been signing up to do a bunch of the evangelism stuff or do a bunch of the website work, haven't appreciated that. And I don't think that it's fair to say, okay, well, go write up all of those considerations and write up all of the stuff that you've learned for the last month of trying to deal with all of this. Like, I don't think that that's a viable solution.
Okay, logos can change, design can change. Is there any reason to stop this going ahead now?
I think the only thing to keep in mind is the availability bias thing, and I guess we just trust the website team to handle that. It sounds like that may be an issue, but it's up to them. Whether they think it is and how they want to handle it. It's my
also if we hate this in a year, we can just change it. Everything is editable.
Yep.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, it sounds like there's no objections to delegating these decisions to the website group. Okay, move on. Stability, roadmap, policy, etc. Michael, do you want to take lead on that one too?
So, staying with the theme of everything is editable, the main thing that I need to get across to everybody is that this is editable, and it will be editable going forward. So if in a year we don't like this policy, we can change it. What we're really trying to do is state what we're going to do now. So what is the commitment that we have right now to stability in terms of taking or not taking breaking changes? And how do we say that succinctly and message it well? I think that the main thing that's going to come up, and because like me and Chris have talked about it a lot in that thread, is some kind of statement about what we will and won't do in terms of reverse compatibility. And reverse compatibility is this very fuzzy topic, and everybody has a slightly different idea about what that means, and we have slightly different confidence about how much we do break something when we change it. So I think the last edit that I wanted to make to it was essentially what we should dedicate ourselves to is not removing any API. And we can state pretty definitively that for the time being, we are not removing any API. And if we are going to remove an API, like, we're going to have to go and change the stability policy first and remessage that.
So I haven't read it in depth, but it's just sitting in my email as a big thread to read and then hop into that issue and read it sometime. I just haven't had the time. But that was the thing that stood out to me when I first went over it, was the stability thing. We won't break anything, it said initially, I think. But if you're saying it's just about not removing things, then that sounds fine to me.
No,
yeah, I mean,
that also sounds fine to me. Although not breaking things is not exactly what you would, that doesn't address all people's concerns. I mean, like, we're about to change the util.is object, it seems. The change is, I would say, about as bad. Like, we don't literally remove something, but we replace something by something that is completely different. That's about as bad, I would say.
So I will say this, okay, and I said this in the thread at one point. People are terrified that we're going to intentionally break compatibility with Node, and that they're going to diverge in these other directions. And the thing that people, like, in our group don't really get is that, like, this is the group of people that have been Node for a long time, plus a few other people, right? But what Node has done in terms of stability between releases and not changing and breaking very much, that culture and, like, the people believing that we're going to do that didn't translate to us at all. So people believe that we're this crazy new thing and we're going to go off and break a ton of stuff. So where Node actually has no written policy about this, like, we actually have to write this down and dedicate ourselves to it going forward. And I know that people are worried about, breaking compatibility and breaking changes and changing behavior, but, like, we are going to be reasonable about those changes. I haven't been able to find a good way. So just saying that we won't remove things gets rid of most of the world. Like, they're worried that we're going to remove a module or we're going to remove an API, and now all of a sudden, when they start up their app, they get an exception.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with that. This is a concern that people maybe misunderstand io.js in its intentions. Writing a policy about this, though, I mean, I hope the understanding will be that we write this down as you know a description of the mode in which we operate, like not something that we as a TC could never break. You know, I don't know. I can't currently
Right. I think
circumstances where it would happen, but like, you know, I don't want to make policies on forgive me the word on things where meritocratic decision making is needed, or you know, or we're dealing with technical issues. I would just say like this is what we're trying to do, and this is how we behave, unless there are really grave other concerns.
so. I think part of the statement literally is something along the lines of the single biggest consideration that we have for any code change or any submission to the project is its potential impact on the rest of the ecosystem. And so anything that is likely to break a large portion of the ecosystem won't happen. And you know, and we won't remove JS API. And when we take new V8s and these kinds of things break, these are the kinds of version number increments that we have and what you can expect.
I think ultimately the issue that I have is the will not. It's basically freeze, like we're stating a policy of we're freezing the API with regards to breaking changes, which we're not really doing. We're open to making breaking changes. It's just that they have to pass. They actually have to demonstrate enough value that it's worth the pain of making people upgrade. We're looking after the health of the platform in that way, not freezing it in amber.
Right. I mean, the util as object thing right now is a really good example of this, right? Like we all know that it's going to break a little bit of stuff. We all know that it's better and that it's a good improvement. And we're really classifying it as a bug fix. It just happens to also change the behavior a little bit. And so yeah, we're not minting the API. If we said that we were minting the API, that would be a thing that we won't remove is different. I mean, you can imagine a future in which domains are there and you can call things in them, but it actually does nothing, right? Just as long as people don't get an exception in modules that they want to use, even though they have stuff contained in async. We're maintaining compatibility as possible, even if we're removing some of the functionality.
I feel that we are like on this. Maybe I just have a bad day or so. I agree with almost nothing of this. I think the util is object change is actually pretty impactful, and the only thing that may make it like that would soothe my concerns is that very people probably use it. On the domains thing, yeah, if you completely change the domains API, that is arguably worse than removing it, because if you remove it, then people will actually know that something has changed about how their app runs. And if you just make it do nothing, then without people ever noticing it, like what if some module uses a domain internally without people ever noticing it, it just stops working or stops working.
No. But
I think that's actually much worse.
No. So think about the main usage and acquire domains, and then somewhere you use like the wrap function, right? Or the bind function around something. That's what most people do with it. Now, if we basically say a message to the entire community that domains are deprecated and that you should be using async ramp and this other tooling to do the same thing, they're still going to trap stuff. Like they're still going to be trapping everything fine for their application and for their modules. What we don't want to do is break 60% of NPM because they require domains somewhere in one of their deep dependencies that won't update. And like that, the problem is that we have these giant deep depth trees where a relatively small change that's used by a handful of modules could impact thousands of other modules that are still depending on old versions. And the time to get all of them updated takes fucking ever because the deep dependency trees are so long. You don't just have to update. You have to get everyone everywhere to update all of their dependencies.
Yeah, but so seriously, how is this different from? Okay, well, my app still starts,
but it doesn't work because we
No,
changed the
it
API to
absolutely-
become a no-op.
No, hold on. It
This
absolutely
works.
does work. It absolutely does work. I mean, it absolutely does work. Your app would still run. Your app is still doing everything that it does. And we print a deprecation warning when you pull in domains, right? So it says like, hey, domains isn't working anymore, but you're probably trapping it with something else. But like I don't want every module that uses async wrap to break, right? Or that has a deep dependency that uses async wrap to break. Like that, I don't think that that's an acceptable change inside of the current platform, maybe ever, right? That's more than half of the npm ecosystem. I mean, I'll have real numbers pretty soon, but it's significant.
Yeah, I'm unconvinced. Sorry. I mean, we don't have to discuss this now because we can go back to the policy. But like, no, nothing of what you just said made sense to me.
Okay, yeah, we can talk about that particular thing in the issue. Are you fine with saying we won't remove API?
I think it's a bit strange. I think it's a good message, but it's as a strict rule. Like, okay, I am fine with saying that as long as we don't present it as a strict rule. Yeah, that is above any reconsideration.
No. So if we want to remove domains and you feel really strongly about that, we're just going to have to revisit the policy and change the policy and then remessage it. That's what we would have to do.
I'd be okay with saying that we won't remove APIs as long as we're actually time boxing that policy. We're actually saying, like, for the immediate future, for the next several months or so, we're not planning on removing anything. And after that point, we may revisit, but it's not going to be like wild departure from what Node is doing. We're not going to do that.
So there's a part of this that gets into LTS and like the long-term support strategy, and I don't want to get into a rat hole with that, but like we need to speak to long-term stability, and in particular, people aren't that worried that we're going to add new API and that there's going to be a bit of bifurcation. People are really worried that we're going to break API. And we just need some kind of statement that we say sort of definitively, no, we're not going to do that. And if in a year what we decide to do is that we like, okay, we're going to add a warning now when you import domains, and then in the future we might want to remove it. Essentially, then we would add to the stability policy, we're not removing APIs for X amount of time, and in order to remove it, we're going to print this warning forever, right? So we'll change the stability policy at the time that we decide that there's something that we actually want to remove.
I think we have a bit of an issue here, which is domains. I personally think domains will just stay, and maybe they'll be refactored so they can what the thing Trev Norris at some point started to do, like build them on top of different infrastructure and make it make it completely separate from all the other details in core. But the reality is, we can't say we'll never remove stuff and at the same time really want to get rid of domains. Like, that's just not possible. We will have to pick either one. We could even say we'll never remove stuff except domains, or we could say we just don't want to remove things, and that means domains will stay even if we hate it very much.
So I think what I'm hearing that maybe isn't getting communicated too well is we want a short-term policy at the very least. Like, this is largely a thing where we want to be able to give people the right messaging that io.js is not going to break their shit. And whether, in the long term we want to break their shit one way or another, like, okay, maybe we will, but that would require changing the stability policy. That would be a whole discussion, and it's not going to happen for a while. So that's kind of what I was hearing with Chris's time box, with Michael's original proposal. And I mean, if we really, we don't have to make a decision right now that we're never going to remove anything, but we can at least make the decision that we do not have any plans to remove anything in the foreseeable future, maybe even with a time limit, right? Like, not for the next 6 months or something.
I agree.
Well, no, so if we put the time limit in there, it totally destroys the messaging, but we can change the language to be like, we do not remove API. So right now we do not remove API. And if we decide to start removing API and you send us a pull request, you're going to have to send a pull request that says you want to change the stability policy before you remove this API.
Right, and that's the difference between the we're definitely not going to remove anything for 6 months, and we're definitely not going to remove anything until we change the stability policy. I totally believe you, Michael, if you say that the latter is a better message, and that seems okay.
But it seems okay, but changing it, basically what you're doing is making the policy sort of part of the bylaw. Like, we have rules, we have majority voting, and we can never remove any API feature, even if we can completely change it. And actually, that's what you just suggested. But as a mere governance technicality, we cannot actually remove anything. That seems like bullshit to me.
No. So it's not at the same level of governance. It's the same level as the contribution policy, right? So the contribution policy says this is how we take contributions, and if at some point we may change that, but this is how we do it right now. And by the same token, we have the stability policy says right now this is what we do. We don't remove API. Don't send us pull requests that remove API.
So we can add. Well, okay. It's a good message, I would say, as a contribution policy. Don't remove API. By the way, also don't break stuff. I think if you're looking for messaging, we might as well say we plan on not breaking existing code, or stuff that works nowadays. It's equally powerful. It's just it's slightly less formal.
No, so another part of it, there has to be actionable that's just this is we're dedicated to this. Other parts of it that are more actionable about what we do, version numbers when changes happen in this API, right? But the first line before this would read something like, the biggest consideration we have over all other considerations in taking changes to io.js is how much they might impact the ecosystem at large, right? So applications and that's the most important factor. We might think that we're basically, what this needs to say is that we're not going to do Python 3. That's what people are freaked out about. So we're not going to make print a function and break every fucking module because we think that it's prettier. If that breaks, everything that's ever been written for Node, we're not going to do that just because we think that it's aesthetically pleasing or technically better, right?
Are you able to summarize, is there anything in this policy that's been proposed that varies from the way that the project has been operating to date? Or is it a capturing of the current culture and process that we have already?
So there's some new stuff in there about how we do LTS long term that I need to change a little bit of the wording on. Basically, that if dependencies we take decide to stop supporting themselves, we'll take over responsibility. And as long as there's a community of people fixing bugs in that stuff, we'll ship patch releases for as long as possible. So we haven't been doing that yet, but what this is really setting us up for, what would we do if we merge back with the Node project? How would we support older versions, right? Or you can think of it as what are we sort of committing to do long term? Because what we don't want to say to IBM or to anybody else in who's worried about LTS, that we are going this group of people in the TC aren't going to take any patch unless it works on 4 years back. What we're saying instead is, as long as there's a community porting fixes, we'll continue to push patch releases. We're not going to block on patch releases because Another thing that we haven't really done yet is that we're considering NAN part of the API in terms of minor versus major bumps. So if we take a V8 change and it breaks a bunch of people, but it can be solved with a new version of NAN, then that's fine. We're going to bump the minor, not the major. It's only when something falls outside of that and we break a bunch of modules that can't just be fixed with NAN that we bump the major.
So can we expect any resolution at this meeting, or are we talking about going back to that issue and coming back at a later date?
So
I'd be happy to talk more on the issue itself, and also we can kind of schedule other meetings and talk about it more there. I agree that we do need a message. I think we can probably work this out in text form for now.
Yeah, so there's sort of three concurrent things going on here. There's one is the stability policy, one is which sort of feeds on the stability policy a bit. And another is basically a slide deck sort of presentation that is like the high-level view of what the roadmap is and what we're doing going forward, that incorporates all of this and some other stuff that we've done in the community and some of the working groups. The slide deck, we really need to get approved as soon as possible, because we have to start messaging this as soon as possible, and we have to get like people to translate it and then talk about it at their local meetup. So if I was going to prioritize them, I would say, like, can we agree about everything that's in the presentation first, and then move forward with the language in the roadmap and the stability policy, and because we're going to have like a long period of time where we're trying to tweak that language to make it satisfy everybody.
Do you have a link to the presentation?
Yeah, I believe I put it in the notes. It's oh nope, I don't have it in the notes yet. Hold on. It's in the roadmap. It's in email slide deck. Just called roadmap. Here you go. Let me put it in. Here we go. It's in roadmap and not anywhere else is because I don't want the translators to try and translate it yet. So I'm trying to hide it from them, kind of.
Those overzealous translators.
Oh man, they translate everything. Translate tweets.
Picture shower. Okay, where do I look?
Yeah, I mean, you'll probably have to pull it down, or to. Yeah, I think you'll have to pull it down.
It should be like, I mean, I don't mind like looking at it right after this meeting, and then, you know, commenting whatever. But is there like a separate issue for the things you want approval on first? I mean, you could just
My concern here is that we're at 1 hour, 1.5 hours, and
I know.
I'm certainly fading, and I'm not sure we're going to get any solid consensus on anything. So,
right.
What can we punt, and what do we really need to resolve right now?
Okay, so here, most of I push the that basically takes this this whole thing. So if you want to pull it down or just read the and give me feedback on the individual bullet points, I'll go in and make sure that those get fixed first. Then I'll feed that into the documents for stability and for the roadmap, and then those will turn it into pull requests, and then we can comment on them further along as pull requests. Is everybody just reading? Is that why nobody's saying anything, or did nobody hear me?
I heard you partially, but I'm also reading.
There's also, I think there might still be some from the latest press and stuff in the stability issue.
I like the typewriter.
That's like the default theme for this slide deck program from Famous. And for the people that are, you know, watching at home, go to io.js/roadmap on GitHub and look at the code there in the roadmap directory, and that is what we're all staring at.
And I also paste the link. Oh no, the wrong link.
People don't see the text in the YouTube link though.
No, I pasted it in the RSC channel, but it was a local file URL that doesn't work. Yeah, I mean, there's like in this roadmap, there's nothing I really disagree with. Well, I mean, maybe with the exception that there's really no movement at this point to have an NG build channel, but I mean, that might happen. That's okay.
So I'm probably worse
Can you restart?
Oh, sorry. Language on ng is going to change pretty dramatically. So it'll be a while until we have builds on the channel, and we'll probably start working on it just as standard lib npm modules for the new standard library, then separate build channel. But it's like a good way to do. We can start doing experimentation, the next generation. Oh, generally though, I would like to get consensus on this idea that it's actually Isaac's idea, like from like over a year ago. But essentially, what we would do is that when we take support for ES6 modules, they get a different standard library than we have today. So we can maintain backwards compatibility with everything that's been built on NPM and provide a new standard lib and new API for modules going forward that would be ES6 centric.
But
Yeah,
so it's
so
like our use strict.
no, so there's a lot of stuff to unpack here. The only thing I wanted to say there is, it's a cool idea, but I think it might, be kind of the second syndrome fallacy that, this time we're going to do it right, and we're never going to need to break back compat again. Maybe it would be good if we kind of did this in conjunction with something that let the core modules be versioned a bit better.
I agree with Dominic very much. I mean, like, actually, this idea is not just 1 year old; it's 2 years old, and the assumption that underlies it is that we now know so much that we can make the definitive good API, and which is why. And while we get the definitive good module system, they are such a perfect happy couple. Let's strive for this. But this is like a castle in the sky. Even if we could get both done, they would never be done both at the same time.
So I don't want to get that there's a lot of stuff that we can do there, right? We can say like, oh, the standard lib comes packaged, or we're in some future npm where you define your node version in npm and then it's like part of your application. Like we have all kinds of insane ideas that people have about how to do that particular part of it, right? Really, what we're saying, all I really want to get to is that when we take new module support, we will do something different than we've been doing, and we won't just give them the same standard lib that we wrote before any of right?
That seems good as a baseline. I mean, and whether we actually end up saying, okay, well, this time you have to do import from fs/v1 to future-proof ourselves or something, we can figure that out when we get there. But I think the basic idea makes some sense.
Yeah, and really it's a good way to message to the community that, like, hey, we're working on this great future tech that you can get really excited about, and here's where you can go work on it. But also, this is how we're never going to break the 200.
That's actually a really good point. Just getting the word out that we are on top of this. We are not behind the curve.
And that it's not going to break everything.
I would strongly prefer that it be developed in stable channels, behind feature flags, or just the idea of having a separate. In this case, the channel is actually a branch.
The feature flag seems like the right thing as long as the feature flag is named something like "this will break next point release." Right?
Yeah.
People have to type that every time they want to use this.
Yeah.
I agree, though. Feature flags seems a nice way to start experimenting with new features.
Yeah, I mean, it could even be we could start working on these new standard library modules and find a way just to cross compile them all down and basically be building the toolchain outside of the core builds entirely, right? That's why I want to rip a lot of the language about the channel out of the idea and just this is the bucket where we're working on future stuff and how we're going to do it, not committing to a particular build or a version number or anything like that.
So something that seems to be missing from this is performance. Did you opt for not putting performance stuff in here? Because I really think that I think there's a strong theme of performance coming up through a lot of people contributing and interested.
Right. So performance is always happening, right? Because Trevor is always looking at stuff. So there's always some performance work happening. On the longer roadmap, it is in there, but I put it after the tracing work. because if we're going to try to get a huge amount of people looking at performance and adding tweaks to it, we probably want to do that after we take a performance hit from tracing and debuggability. Because the stuff is, I'm not convinced that everything that we do there is going to be free. So that's why it's just staged like that. And it's not in this particular presentation because it's not something that we want people like working on like right now today. Right now, like literally right now, I'm running performance benchmarks between O12 and us, and we're winning. So that'll be nice.
Well, I think it's good to say, like, okay, it's localization and tracing because that's what actually happening right now. And performance, yeah, there are some people doing that, but it's like I wouldn't say it's a major theme. What I'm seeing is many people micro-optimize here and there a little bit, but no, we all sort of tacitly know that the HTTP server could actually be kind of 3 times faster, but nobody's really working on that.
Okay, so if I may, the whole tracing async wrap thing, the only hit you take is when you actually tap into it. Actually, the implementation of it helped improve performance because things got cleaned up in the process. So I'm not concerned about that. To be completely honest, the areas where things like the biggest bottleneck for performance is streams. Like if you tap directly into the TCP bindings, like TCP wrap, and write a TCP server versus using the net module, you get significantly better performance.
So I just back to the comment about performance I raised initially. It's not so much about the fact that we're always doing performance work. We're always people are doing micro optimizations and everybody runs benchmarks. I think that there's this theme that's coming out through the various repos, including build, that people would like a more structured story around performance. So my suggestion has been for a while to set up a performance working group. We haven't done that yet. I think that'll come soon. But a group that can actually work towards defining what performance even means, because at the moment our benchmarks are sort of micro benchmarks, and there's conflicts, and you run them and they're not even that great in terms of their consistency. Being able to have better numbers, being able to track those numbers over time, having that automated, coming up with better policies around how we measure new changes. Like the last few releases we've had things in there that have been in quotes for performance, but we have no numbers. We don't even know what that means. It's just this vague thing you throw out there. So my suggestion on performance is simply that I see that as a theme that's coming up through discussions of when we want to get more organized around the performance story of this project.
And I think a lot of that actually ends up being on build, and maybe it's new people from the performance working group that help build do this, but I mean, until we have numbers for all of the builds that we do and comparing them and charting them for all of the different performance tests that we already have, it's hard to think about like what are we doing in the future, right?
Okay, so the other thing I'm disappointed that the LTS stuff isn't is a bit vague, but I guess it's difficult to be any more firm than that. So you're just saying that patch releases for older lines will be published as long as people are willing to send patches. Like, what is a line? Is that any release? Somebody wants to patch 1.1 now. Do we accept patches for that? It's nice to have a stronger LTS story to say we have identified particular releases as being worthy of doing LTS for. We're going to branch that and actually keep on releasing for that as long as we get patches for it.
Well, I think that this is another thing where we gain than we do from taking it on. So if there's a line that people care about, then they'll be patching it, and we can just release those patches.
So what's a line though? It's just saying a release.
It's literally like any minor release, right? So if somebody finds a giant break between 1.2 and 1.3 right now, and there's a giant business being built on 1.2 that needs to backport fixes, if they're willing to backport the fixes, we'll push patch releases. We will automate that, and we'll leave it up to the community doing LTS to be doing that backporting and reviewing those.
Okay. Perhaps that could be clarified in there what a line is.
I'll do that.
Lastly, it'd be good to put some spell checking across this and some consistency in some of the grammar, and like V8 being capital V, io.js having a dot in it. So that's all.
In the presentation or in the roadmap full document?
Presentation.
Oh wow, okay. I didn't even notice that. I wrote it pretty fast, so.
Okay, yeah, there's some spelling mistakes in there too. So just yeah.
Okay, I'll get on that.
So it sounds to me like there's no big objections to the presentation if that's what you're wanting to move forward with.
Awesome.
Not
Okay.
from my end. Is there anything? Is there a proposed text in like for this new we will never change or break anything policy? I was just looking through the different issues in the roadmap repo. I couldn't really find it.
It's buried in a comment on the stability policy. I'll update the actual stability policy with it when we get off the call.
Cool. Okay. I'll read it before next time.
Cool.
Okay, this is going on too long, so let's finish up.
I think we're done. Yeah.
Okay, next meeting in a week.
Yep.
Great.
We'll probably come back to this discussion. If there's nothing else major, maybe we'll move this discussion to the beginning of the meeting so that we can actually make some more traction on it. So this what you're wanting to cover here, Michael. Otherwise, because the stuff we leave to the end is the stuff that we just can't concentrate on.
Right. Maybe what we should do the agenda next time and then have people add specific issues to that, because the whole policy and the whole document, like, they're huge. So if people want to add, like, people should just note specific things that they want to talk about beforehand.
Yeah, it would be nice though if like sort of my reading list was somewhat easy to scan, because sometimes the issues get massive and it's not always clear what the discussion will actually be about.
It'll be a pull request by then. So it'll
cool.
be like an actual document pull request.
Cool. All right. Well, sounds like
okay.
we're done. I'm. By the way, like maybe I have a bad day. I disagreed with Michael a lot today. It seems. I generally feel that these TC meetings are super, like, good. By the way, like there actually are things to disagree on, and everybody is super helpful. So thank you all for doing this. That's all.
Yeah, I like a good argument too. It's good to have a forum for arguing and fighting. No, okay, let's wrap it up unless anyone else wants to throw something in. We will stop the broadcast now. Thanks everyone for joining who is watching online and will watch us afterwards, and thanks for TC members for joining us and non-TC members. See you next week.
Great.
Goodbye.